I went undercover to an overseas R&D center for 2 years, working in isolation to crack the core AI chip technology for my husband's tech company. He promised me that once we achieved the technical breakthrough, I would be named co-founder when the company went public. But when I returned home with patents that could revolutionize the entire industry, I discovered my private office had been turned into a nursery. At the pre-IPO celebration party, he was holding my intern assistant in his arms, announcing that she was now the company's youngest CTO. The intern rubbed her slightly rounded belly, her face full of smug satisfaction. I let out a cold laugh and shut down all the core servers with a flick of my wrist. Want to use my life's work to elevate your mistress? I'll make your entire company go down with you.
1. Bang.
I shoved open the doors to the penthouse ballroom. Inside, the lights blazed and designer dresses swirled. To crack that critical technical barrier, I'd worked day and night in Silicon Valley for 2 years. I slept less than 4 hours a day and ended up in the ER 3 times from exhaustion. I came back with a final patent authorization, thrilled to give my husband Ethan Chase a huge surprise. But the scene before me was like a bucket of ice water poured from the top of my head straight down to my feet. On the stage in the center of the ballroom, Ethan wore the custom-tailored suit I'd personally ordered for him. His arm was wrapped intimately around the waist of a young woman. It was Madison, the intern assistant I'd hired before going abroad. A fresh graduate who couldn't even write basic code and only knew how to act cute and flirt. Right now, she was wearing a gorgeous evening gown with that sapphire necklace around her neck, the one I'd admired at an auction, the one Ethan had said was too expensive, maybe later. Ladies and gentlemen, investors. Ethan raised his glass, his voice booming with pride. Today is the most important day in Summers Tech's history. Our core AI chip development is finally complete, and next month, the company will officially ring the bell on the stock exchange. Thunderous applause erupted below. Ethan lowered his head and kissed Madison on the forehead, his eyes dripping with affection. Here, I want to give special thanks to one person. Our company's new CTO and my future wife, Madison. These past 2 years, she led the team working day and night to achieve today's technical breakthrough. And she's also carrying my child. Double blessings. The whole room exploded. Mr. Chase and Ms. Cooper are such a perfect match. Congratulations, Mr.
Chase.
Double blessings indeed. Ms. Cooper is so young and already shouldering the technical operations. What a powerhouse. I stood in the doorway listening to this nauseating flattery, feeling like I'd entered some absurd alternate reality. Madison led the team? Technical breakthrough? She couldn't tell C++ from Java if her life depended on it. What the hell did she break through? These past 2 years, I was overseas with a handful of core engineers under crushing pressure, writing that underlying core code line by line. I'd traded half my life for these results, and now they'd become her ticket to promotion and status as the mother of his child. I took a deep breath, my heels clicking as I walked toward the stage step by step. The sound of my stilettos striking the marble floor rang especially clear in the gradually quieting ballroom. The crowd automatically parted to make way. The executives who used to call me Miss Summers all changed their expressions when they saw me, their eyes shifty, whispering among themselves. When Ethan saw me, the smile froze on his face. He instinctively released his arm from around Madison, a flash of panic in his eyes, quickly replaced by coldness and impatience. Madison saw me too. Not only did she show no guilt, she actually thrust out her barely visible belly and leaned closer to Ethan, speaking in a saccharine voice. "Oh, Lila, you're finally back." She raised her glass of juice, looking down at me from her position above, every inch the victor. "Please have a seat. Everyone's celebrating. You've worked hard studying abroad these 2 years. Now that I'm handling the company's technical R&D, you can just rest easy." I looked at her smug face and laughed coldly. Studying abroad? Handling things? I turned and stared hard at Ethan. "Ethan Chase, is this what you told them about me? I nearly killed myself developing technology for you overseas, and you told them I went to study abroad." Ethan frowned, hurried down from the stage, and hissed at me in a low voice. "Lila, what are you making a scene for? There are investors here. Don't embarrass me." "Embarrass you?" I shook off his outstretched hand. "You're using code I wrote to elevate your mistress, and you don't feel embarrassed, so why should I?"
2.
Ethan's face turned iron gray. "What are you talking about? What do you mean your code?" "That's the collective achievement of the company team. Madison, as project lead, made invaluable contributions. Lila, I know you feel bitter, but you need to face reality. These 2 years you weren't in the country, Madison helped me manage everything at the company, top to bottom. She's not only capable at work, she's also carrying my child. I owe her something." His self-righteous tone made it sound like I was the one who'd cheated and stolen credit. I was so angry I laughed, pointing at Madison's meticulously made-up face. "Capable at work? She can't even understand basic algorithmic logic. What project could she possibly lead? The project of providing you inspiration in bed. Smack. Ethan suddenly raised his hand and slapped me hard across the face. The force was so strong it made me stumble and fall to the ground. I tasted blood at the corner of my mouth. The entire room fell deathly silent. Madison screamed and hid behind Ethan, clutching her belly and putting on a fragile act. Ethan, don't hit Lila. She just can't accept it yet.
Oh.
My stomach hurts a little. Hearing this, Ethan immediately tensed up, quickly supporting Madison, then turning to point at me viciously. Lila, watch your mouth. If you dare hurt the baby in Madison's belly, I'll never forgive you. The surrounding executives and colleagues started criticizing me too. Lila, you're being so unreasonable. Mr. Chase is worth billions now. What's wrong with getting a younger, prettier wife?
Exactly.
Ms. Cooper is a company hero now. You haven't contributed anything in 2 years, so what gives you the right to make a scene here? Just apologize to Ms. Cooper and stop making Mr. Chase angry. I got up from the floor, wiped the blood from my mouth, and looked at these bootlicking faces. My heart went completely cold. Years ago, Ethan and I started our business in a 100-square-foot basement apartment. To land our first investment, I drank with investors until I had a stomach hemorrhage and spent 2 weeks in the hospital. To meet project deadlines, I pulled so many all-nighters I developed sudden hearing loss in my left ear. My hearing still hasn't fully recovered. I built him up from a penniless nobody into the glamorous tech mogul he is today. Now that he's successful, he wants to dump his devoted wife. Ethan Chase, have you forgotten that I own 49% of Summers Tech shares? I stared at him coldly. Want me gone?
Fine.
Split the company in half, and I'll take what's mine. Ethan laughed like he'd heard the funniest joke in the world. He straightened his tie, walked up to me, and said in a voice only we could hear, Shares? Lila, while you were abroad these 2 years, the domestic equity went through several rounds of dilution and restructuring. The shares you hold now amount to less than 1%. For old time's sake, I've prepared $500,000 in compensation. Take the money, sign the divorce papers, and hand over the core source code. Otherwise, you won't get a dime, and I'll make sure you can't work anywhere in this industry. My whole body trembled as I clenched my teeth. $500,000? To buy out half my company? To buy 2 years of my life? Ethan Chase, dream on. I turned to leave. Stop, Ethan shouted. A dozen burly security guards immediately rushed forward and surrounded me. Ethan walked up behind me, his voice icy. Lila, don't refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a penalty. Without that source code, the company's chips can't go into production and the IPO will fall through. If you don't hand over the hard drive with the source code today, don't think about leaving through that door. He was going to rob me outright. I looked at the menacing security guards around me and pulled a black encrypted hard drive from my bag. Ethan's eyes lit up as he reached to snatch it. I laughed coldly and smashed the hard drive toward the champagne tower beside us. Crash. The sound of shattering glass rang out. The hard drive fell to the floor, and without hesitation, I raised my stiletto heel and stomped down hard. Crack. The hard drive shattered into pieces. Want the source code? In your next life. Ethan's eyes nearly popped out of his head as he lunged at me like a madman. Lila, you crazy bitch. I'll kill you. I took advantage of the chaos to shove a guard aside and ran out of the ballroom without looking back. 3. Outside. The rain was pouring. I didn't have an umbrella. I was soaked through, and the cold wind cut straight to my heart. I got in a cab and went back to the downtown villa Ethan and I shared. We'd bought it for our 3rd wedding anniversary. I'd sold the old house my mom left me to come up with the down payment. I walked to the door and habitually entered my fingerprint. Beep, fingerprint error. I froze for a moment, then entered the passcode. Passcode error. I pounded on the door. Open up. Let me in. After a while, the door finally cracked open. It was Ethan's mother, my mother-in-law. She wore a silk robe and held a glass of red wine, looking at me with complete irritation. Wailing like a banshee in the middle of the night. What's all the noise? Seeing it was me, she rolled her eyes and moved to close the door. I jammed my hand against the doorframe, staring at her coldly. This is my home. Let me in. My mother-in-law scoffed and looked me up and down in my bedraggled state. Your home? The property deed has my son's name on it. You can't even have children. What gives you the right to call this your home? Ethan already told me you're getting divorced. Madison's moving in soon, and she's carrying our family's heir. Get lost and don't bring your poverty stench into our house. The sound of high heels came from inside. Madison appeared wearing my limited edition slippers and my cashmere wrap, holding an apple, walking over leisurely. Mom, who's making all that noise? It's upsetting the baby. My mother-in-law immediately put on a fawning smile and rushed to support her. Oh, my precious. Walk slowly. Don't disturb the baby. It's just a beggar. I'll get rid of her right away. Madison walked to the door and looked at me with fake surprise. Oh my, Lila. Look at you, all soaked. Didn't Ethan arrange a hotel for you? You know, Ethan said the master bedroom decor is too old-fashioned. Tomorrow they're tearing it all out to renovate and make it into a nursery for me. All your raggedy old clothes and junk. I had the maid pack them up and throw them in the trash bins in the basement garage. I shoved past my mother-in-law, forced my way inside, and ran straight for the second-floor study. That's where my father's last possession was kept, a programming notebook he'd written by hand. It was my most precious treasure. I burst into the study. It had already been ransacked. My desk had been cleared out. All the books on the shelves were gone. I whipped around, my eyes bloodshot as I glared at Madison, who'd followed me up. Where's my dad's notebook? Madison covered her mouth and giggled. That ratty old thing? The pages were all yellow, covered in chicken scratch. I couldn't even read. I thought it was dirty, so I had the maid burn it as scrap paper. Lila, you're not going to get mad at me over some old notebook, are you? I'm pregnant, you know. Burn. My mind went boom, and my last shred of rationality snapped completely. I charged at her like a crazed lioness, grabbed her hair, and slapped her hard across the face. Smack. You dared burn my father's belongings. I'll kill you. Madison let out a pig-like squeal, struggling desperately. My mother-in-law screeched and rushed at me, scratching and clawing, yanking at my clothes. You jinx. You dare hit my grandson's mother. I'll kill you. I kicked my mother-in-law, sending her sprawling, grabbed Madison by the hair, and slammed her face hard against the wall. Give me back my dad's notebook. Give it back. Madison's forehead split open and bled. She burst into hysterical tears. Help. Murder. Mom, save me. Suddenly urgent footsteps came from outside. Ethan burst in with several bodyguards. Seeing the scene, his eyes went wild and he roared. Lila, stop it right now. He rushed forward and kicked me in the stomach without mercy. I flew backward and crashed hard into the stair railing. My internal organs felt like they'd shifted. I curled up on the ground in agony, unable to breathe for what felt like forever. Ethan tenderly gathered Madison's bloodied form into his arms. Madison, are you okay? Does your stomach hurt? Madison collapsed into his embrace, crying pitifully. Ethan, it hurts so much. Lila tried to kill me. She tried to kill our baby. Ethan turned his head, his eyes vicious enough to devour someone. Lila, you're absolutely insane. A monster. Let me tell you, after what you did to Madison today, I will never forgive you. Throw her out. Never let her set foot in here again. Several bodyguards came over, dragged me up from the floor like a dead dog, and threw me out the front door. Bang. The heavy door slammed shut mercilessly in front of me. I lay in the freezing rain, the violent pain in my abdomen nearly making me pass out. Rainwater mixed with mud streamed into my eyes, blurring my vision. I bit my lip hard until I tasted thick blood. Ethan Chase. Madison Cooper. That old hag. You'll pay back everything you owe me 1,000 times, 10,000 times over.
4.
I don't know how long I lay there in the rain, until a pair of black custom leather shoes stopped in front of me. A black umbrella opened above my head, blocking out the torrential downpour. I struggled to lift my head. Before me was an extremely cold, sharply defined face. Adrian Sterling, CEO of Sterling Empire, Ethan Chase's biggest business rival. And for the past 2 years, my true secret partner overseas. Miss Summers, seems like your celebration tonight wasn't very pleasant. Adrian's voice was deep and magnetic, with a barely detectable hint of mockery. I pushed myself up from the ground, swaying as I stood, and looked at him coldly. Mr. Sterling here to watch me suffer? Adrian chuckled softly, took off his black trench coat, and draped it over my shoulders. I'm just here to take my chief technology officer home. The car's outside. Let's go. I didn't refuse. I followed him to the Rolls-Royce Phantom parked by the curb. The cabin had the heat on. Adrian handed me a cup of hot coffee. That hard drive destroyed? He asked casually. I cradled the coffee cup, feeling its warmth.
Fake.
It had the complete series of some old cartoons on it. Adrian raised an eyebrow, a smile of appreciation curving his lips. And the real source code? I pointed to my own head. All in here. No one else in the world can make that system run except me. Adrian leaned back in the leather seat, his long fingers tapping lightly on his knee. Ethan thinks that as long as he kicks you out, he can take your technology to ring the bell at the stock exchange. He has no idea you already built a backdoor into that system. I laughed coldly, a flash of ruthlessness in my eyes. Did he really think he could just take what's mine? I'm going to make him fall as hard as he's climbed. Adrian turned to look at me, his gaze deep. What do you need me to do? Help me prepare a big gift. I looked out at the speeding nightscape. Ethan wants to hold his IPO bell-ringing ceremony, doesn't he? I want the whole world to see his true face. The next morning, I was still resting in the hotel Adrian had arranged when my phone started ringing like crazy. It was Ethan calling. I hit answer and turned on the recording. Lila, what the hell did you do to the source code? On the other end, Ethan's voice was frantic, like a rabid boar. Why is all the test data showing errors? The system won't even start. The investors are coming to see the final demo tomorrow. Hand over the decryption file right now. I took a leisurely sip of milk. Mr. Chase, we're getting divorced. Whether your company goes public or not has nothing to do with me. Ethan gritted his teeth. Lila, don't push me. You think I can't do anything if you don't hand it over? Your brother's kidney transplant surgery years ago. That went through company accounts. $300,000. I have all the transfer records and signatures. If I report this to the police, that's embezzlement, misappropriation of company funds. Enough to put you away for 10 years or more. My hand clenched suddenly, nails digging deep into my palm. My brother had sudden kidney failure years ago and urgently needed a transplant. I was overseas in lockdown development and couldn't get back. Ethan had volunteered to advance the money from company funds, saying I could pay it back from my dividends when I returned. Turns out he'd been calculating this from the very beginning. He'd deliberately made this transaction look like evidence of embezzlement just so he could have leverage over me today. Ethan Chase, you're truly despicable, I said through clenched teeth. No mercy in war. Ethan sneered. 3 o'clock this afternoon. Come to the office, sign the divorce papers, and hand over the decryption file. Otherwise, just wait for the court summons and spend the rest of your life in prison. The call was brutally disconnected. I looked at the blackened phone screen and laughed in fury.
Fine.
Very good. Ethan Chase, if you want to play, let's play big. I set the phone down on the glass-topped nightstand, the silence of the hotel suite rushing back into my ears. My hand was still trembling, not from fear, but from the cold, clinical rage that had settled into my bones. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen. The bruising on my cheek from Ethan's slap was already turning a dull, ugly purple, and my stomach still ached where he had kicked me. But my mind had never been clearer. For 10 years, I had been the silent engine behind Summer's tech. I had tolerated his mother's snide remarks about my fertility, accepted the long stretches of isolation in overseas labs, and handed over the spotlight to him because I believed we were building a future together. I was wrong. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a stepping stone. And now that he thought he had reached the top, he was ready to kick the stone away. A quiet knock at the door broke my train of thought. Come in, I said, my voice raspy. Adrian Sterling entered, carrying a tablet and a file folder. He had changed into a charcoal gray suit, looking every bit the formidable force that kept Wall Street on its toes. He glanced at my bruised cheek, his eyes narrowing slightly before his expression smoothed back into its habitual, cool composure. My legal team has finished reviewing the transaction records for your brother's surgery, Adrian said, sitting on the armchair opposite me. He laid the folder on the table. Ethan's bluffing. But it's a dangerous bluff if you don't handle it correctly. I leaned forward, pulling the folder toward me. How so? The $300,000 was transferred from a secondary corporate account, Adrian explained, pointing to a highlighted line on the ledger. At the time, you were listed as the joint executive director with full signing authority. Furthermore, we found an email thread from Ethan dated 3 days after the transfer, where he explicitly refers to the amount as an advance on your fiscal year dividends. Legally, it's a shareholder draw, not embezzlement. I let out a breath. I didn't realize I'd been holding. So, he can't lock me up.
No.
But he can still file a civil suit and freeze your personal assets during the IPO window to keep you quiet, Adrian said, leaning back. And if he leaks a fabricated embezzlement story to the press, it could damage your professional reputation before you even launch your next venture with me. We need him to commit to this lie in writing before witnesses. Once he files a false police report or signs a declaration under oath, we have him for malicious prosecution and perjury. I stared at the highlighted ledger. He wants me in his office at 3 o'clock to sign the divorce papers and hand over the decryption key. He thinks he has me cornered. Are you going? Yes, I said, a cold smile touching my lips. I'm going to give him exactly what he wants. Or, at least, what he thinks he wants. At 2:45 p.m., Adrian's driver dropped me off a block away from the Summers Tech headquarters. Walking into the lobby felt like stepping into a house I had built, only to find the locks changed. The sleek, minimalist design, the silver logo on the Italian marble wall, I had designed all of it. The receptionist, a girl named Chloe whom I had personally mentored when she joined the administrative team, looked up. When she saw my face, her eyes widened. She instinctively looked toward the elevators, then back at me, her face flushed with embarrassment. Miss Summers, I mean Miss Vance, she stammered, using my maiden name. Mr. Chase he's in a meeting. I have an appointment, Chloe, I said gently. Don't worry, I won't make things difficult for you. I took the private elevator to the executive suite on the 28th floor. When the door slid open, I was greeted by the familiar hum of the server rooms down the hall, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. Employees who used to greet me with warm smiles suddenly found their keyboards fascinating. They scurried past with their heads down, terrified of being seen speaking to the soon-to-be ex-wife. I walked straight to the CEO's office and pushed the door open. Ethan was sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, reviewing a document. Beside him stood Madison, her forehead bandaged with a neat strip of white gauze. She was leaning against a shoulder, sipping a caramel macchiato. When they saw me, Madison immediately straightened up, her hand flying to her belly in a practiced, defensive gesture. Ethan's face darkened, his jaw tightening as he stood up. "You're on time," he said, his voice cold and transactional. "I half expected you to run and miss the opportunity to see how my hard work is being spent." I walked into the room, refusing to show any weakness. I stood before his desk, ignoring the chair. "Let's get this over with, Ethan." Ethan threw a thick document onto the desk. "These are the divorce papers. You waive all claims to Summers Tech intellectual property, past, present, and future. You also agree to a non-disclosure agreement regarding the company's internal operations and the core AI chip technology. In exchange, I will authorize a lump sum payment of $500,000 and decline to press charges for the $300,000 you stole for your brother's treatment. And the 1% share I supposedly have left after your restructuring?" I asked, keeping my voice flat. "You'll surrender those too," Madison chimed in, her voice dripping with sweet venom. "Lila, you have to understand, a major tech company can't have a disgruntled ex-wife on the cap table. It looks terrible to the underwriters. We're doing you a favor by letting you walk away with $500,000. With your reputation, you won't find another job in Silicon Valley anyway." I looked at Madison. The sapphire necklace I had wanted was glittering against her collarbone. "I wasn't speaking to the intern," I said softly. Madison's face flushed red, her eyes darting to Ethan.
Ethan.
"Look at her. She's still acting like she owns the place." "Lila, watch your mouth," Ethan snapped, stepping in front of Madison. "You have no leverage here. Sign the papers, hand over the flash drive with the master decryption key, and you walk out of here a free woman. Refuse, and the police are already on standby down the hall." I reached into my bag and pulled out a sleek, silver USB drive. I held it between two fingers. "The master decryption key for the hardware abstraction layer," I said. "Without this, your compiled binary code won't interface with the physical chip registers. The chip will just be an expensive piece of silicon." Ethan's eyes flared with greed. He reached for it, but I pulled my hand back. "The papers first," I said. "And I want a signed release of liability from the board, stating that all previous financial transactions involving my name have been audited and cleared of any wrongdoing." Ethan laughed, a dry, mocking sound. "You're in no position to negotiate." "Then call the police," I said, my voice steady. "Let's go to court. Let's let the discovery phase of the trial lay bare every single transaction this company has made over the last 5 years. Let's see what the SEC thinks of your financial restructuring when they audit your books during the pre-IPO quiet period. Do you think your underwriters will wait around for a criminal trial to resolve?" Ethan's smile vanished.
He knew I was right.
An active SEC investigation or a high-profile corporate lawsuit would kill the IPO instantly. He glared at me, his eyes filled with pure hatred.
Fine.
"I have the board release right here. I figured you'd try to squirm." He pulled another document from his drawer, signed it with a flourish, and pushed both papers toward me. I picked up the pen. Before I signed, I looked him dead in the eye. "My father's notebook. Madison told me she burned it. I want to know if that's true." Ethan didn't look at me. "It was just a bunch of old junk, Lila. What does it matter now?" "It matters to me." Madison let out a small, irritated sigh. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Lila. It's in my desk drawer. I didn't burn it. I wanted to see if there was anything useful in it, but it was just outdated algorithms from the 90s. You can have your stupid book back." She walked over to her desk, which used to be my desk, and pulled the leather-bound notebook from the bottom drawer, tossing it onto the floor at my feet. The spine cracked slightly as it hit the carpet. A wave of heat rushed to my face, but I forced myself to remain calm. I knelt down, picked up my father's notebook, and carefully wiped the dust from its cover. I placed it gently in my bag. Then, I stood up, signed the divorce papers, and pushed them back across the desk. I laid the silver USB drive next to them. "The key is on the drive," I said. "It'll decrypt the bootloader and compile the remaining drivers." Ethan snatched the drive, his face lighting up with triumph. "Get out of my office, Lila. And don't ever let me see your face in this building again." "Don't worry, Ethan," I said, adjusting my bag on my shoulder. "You won't have to." The moment I stepped out of the building, I got into Adrian's waiting car. Adrian was waiting for me, his laptop open on his knees. "Did you get it?" I pulled the leather-bound notebook from my bag and held it tight against my chest. I got it. And I signed the papers. And the decryption key? I lean my head back against the leather headrest, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face. Oh, I gave him the key, but I didn't tell him about the compile time flag. Adrian looked up from his screen, a look of genuine intrigue in his eyes. Tell me. The decryption key I gave him will work, I explained. It will compile the code, and the chip will pass all basic diagnostics. On paper, everything will look flawless. But I wrote a logical loop into the compiler. The moment the chip is subjected to high-density neural network computations, like the ones required for their live launch demo next week, the instruction cache will overflow. It will trigger a thermal runaway, physically frying the chip registers from the inside out. Can they debug it? Adrian asked. No, I replied. Because the error isn't in the source code they have access to. It's embedded in the compiler's optimization layer, which I encrypted. To find it, Madison would need to rebuild the entire compiler from scratch. And she doesn't even know what a compiler does. Adrian let out a low, appreciative chuckle. Brilliant. And meanwhile, we launch our own offensive. Yes, I said, my eyes turning cold. We build the real thing. And we show the world what happens when you try to build an empire on stolen ground. Over the next 5 days, I lived in Adrian's private research facility on the outskirts of the city. Unlike the makeshift setup I had endured in Silicon Valley, this lab was a state-of-the-art sanctuary. Adrian had spared no expense. He had recruited a dozen of the finest system engineers, database architects, and hardware designers in the country, all bound by strict non-disclosure agreements. Everything you need, Lila, Adrian had told me on the first day. Just build it. And I did. Working with Adrian's team, we didn't just rebuild the chip, we evolved it. Using my father's original notes on nonlinear data processing, the ones Madison had dismissed as outdated 90s algorithms, I realized my father had predicted the exact bottleneck modern AI accelerators face today: memory bandwidth. By applying his mathematical models to our new architecture, we created a chip that didn't just match Summers Tech's performance, it ran 40% faster while consuming half the power. We named it the Ether 1. Meanwhile, the media campaign for Summers Tech was reaching a fever pitch. Every tech blog, financial news outlet, and business magazine was running profiles on Ethan Chase and his genius young CTO, Madison Cooper. I sat in the lab break room, watching a live-stream television interview. Madison was sitting on a plush sofa, wearing a tailored cream blazer, her hair perfectly blown out. Ethan sat beside her, looking smugly satisfied. It was a challenging 2 years, Madison said to the interviewer, her voice dripping with practiced modesty. While some former team members chose to pursue other interests abroad, I knew we couldn't let our vision die. I worked 80-hour weeks, sometimes sleeping on the office couch, to solve the core architectural bugs. The Prometheus chip is my baby. And what a beautiful baby it is, the interviewer smiled, gesturing to the graphic of the chip on the screen behind them. Mr. Chase, the pre-IPO valuation for Summers Tech has already reached $6 billion. The market is calling this the most anticipated tech launch of the decade. Are you nervous about the live demonstration next Tuesday? Ethan smiled confidently, adjusting his cuffs. Not at all, Sarah. We have complete faith in our technology and in our CTO. Next Tuesday, during our pre-IPO conference at the Metropolitan Center, we will run a live, real-time rendering of a complex deep learning model on stage. The world will see that Summers Tech isn't just a software company anymore. We are the future of infrastructure. I switched off the television. She looks very confident. Adrian's voice came from behind me. He was standing in the doorway, holding 2 files. Arrogance is a very effective blindfold, I said, setting my coffee cup down. How are the preparations on your end? We've quietly acquired 15% of the short options on Summers Tech through various offshore entities, Adrian said, walking over and handing me a file. The moment their stock lists, it's going to experience a historical correction. And I've secured us a block of invitations to the pre-IPO conference. I looked at the invitation cards. The gold embossing read, Summers Tech, the dawn of Prometheus. Will you be ready? Adrian asked. The Ether 1 prototype has completed its final simulation run, I said, looking out the window at the gray city skyline. We are ready. It's time to show Ethan what happens when he plays with fire. Tuesday arrived with a heavy, overcast sky. The Metropolitan Center was buzzing with energy. Hundreds of institutional investors, venture capitalists, tech journalists, and analysts filled the grand auditorium. The air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne, fresh coffee, and anticipation. I arrived with Adrian, wearing a sleek, tailored black suit that contrasted sharply with the colorful gowns and flashy outfits of the crowd. My hair was pulled back into a sharp, professional ponytail. The bruise on my cheek had faded, replaced by a calm, cold resolve. As we walked through the lobby, several investors recognized Adrian. Mr. Sterling, I didn't expect to see you here, an older gentleman in a bespoke pinstripe suit said, shaking Adrian's hand. Are you looking to get a piece of Summer's tech before the bell rings tomorrow? I'm just here to witness history, Harold, Adrian replied with a polite, enigmatic smile. This is Lila Vance, my chief technology officer. Harold looked at me, his brow furrowing slightly. Vance? Weren't you with Summer's tech during their early days? I was the founder, I said simply. But today, I'm just an observer. Before Harold could press further, the chime sounded, signaling the start of the presentation. We made our way into the auditorium and took our seats in the VIP section near the front, arranged by Adrian's team. The lights dimmed, and a deep, cinematic bass tone rumbled through the floorboards. A massive LED screen on the stage lit up with the Summers Tech logo, followed by a dramatic video showcasing the history of the Prometheus chip. It was filled with sweeping shots of clean rooms, spinning hard drives, and, of course, cinematic close-ups of Ethan and Madison looking intensely at monitors. As the video ended, Ethan walked out onto the stage under a bright spotlight. The applause was deafening. Thank you. Thank you all for being here, Ethan began, his voice booming with charisma. He looked every bit the visionary leader. 5 years ago, we had a dream. We wanted to build a brain for the next generation of human progress. Today, that dream is a physical reality. He gestured to a pedestal on the stage, where a small, glass-encased module sat. Inside was the Prometheus chip. I won't bore you with corporate slide decks, Ethan continued, smiling at the crowd. Instead, I want to show you what this chip can do. I want to invite our brilliant CTO, Madison Cooper, to the stage to run our live demonstration. The crowd erupted in applause again as Madison walked out, wearing a stunning emerald green dress that draped over her slightly rounded belly. She waved to the crowd, her face radiant with smug satisfaction. She walked over to a high-end terminal connected to the server rack on the side of the stage. Thank you, Ethan, Madison said into her headset microphone. Today, we will be running a live neural network synthesis. We will feed our Prometheus chip over 500 gigabytes of raw, unstructured medical imaging data and have it train a diagnostic model in real time. Normally, this process takes standard server clusters several hours. Prometheus will do it in under 2 minutes. She turned to the keyboard. On the massive screen behind her, a terminal interface appeared, displaying the system parameters. Initializing system, Madison announced, typing a command. On screen, the system's status turned green. Bootloader, verified. HAL, operational. Chip temperature, 38 degrees Celsius. I watched from the audience, my hands resting calmly in my lap. Beside me, Adrian leaned back, his eyes fixed on the screen. Loading data pipeline, Madison said, her fingers flying across the keys. She had memorized the commands perfectly. I had to give her credit. She had rehearsed this well. The data progress bar began to fill. 10%, 35%, 60%. The data transfer is complete, Madison said proudly. We will now begin the high-density training cycle. In 3, 2, 1, start. She pressed the enter key. On the screen, the processing counter began to tick up. The neural network visualization began to form, nodes lighting up in a complex, multi-layered web. Processing speed, 1.2 petabytes/section. The crowd gasped. The speed was truly revolutionary. Ethan stood at the edge of the stage, his arms crossed, a massive grin on his face. He looked out at the audience, finding my face in the crowd. He locked eyes with me, his grin widening into a mocking, victorious sneer. You lost, Lila, his eyes seemed to say. I have the technology, I have the girl, and tomorrow, I'll have the billions. I didn't blink. I simply raised my wrist and glanced at my watch. 1 minute and 10 seconds. On the screen, the training progress reached 78%. Suddenly, a high-pitched hum began to emanate from the server rack on the stage. Madison's smile faltered slightly. She looked over at the rack, then back at her screen. The training speed is increasing, she said, her voice wavering slightly. We are experiencing a temporary thermal spike. This is within normal parameters. Chip temperature, 85 degrees Celsius, 92 degrees Celsius. The text on the screen flashed yellow. Ethan's grin froze. He stepped closer to the pedestal, looking at the cooling indicators. Madison, check the cooling pump, he muttered, trying to keep his voice away from his microphone. I am, Madison whispered, her fingers suddenly scrambling over the keyboard. She was typing commands, but they were syntax errors. Error. Command not found. Error. Command not found. What are you doing? Ethan hissed, his professional facade slipping. Abort the training cycle. I can't. Madison panicked, her voice projecting through her live microphone. The system isn't responding to the interrupt command. The compiler is, it's stuck in an execution loop. Chip temperature, 105 degrees Celsius. The text on the screen turned blood red. System warning. Thermal throttling disabled. System warning. Critical hardware failure imminent. Shut it down. Pull the plug. Ethan yelled, completely forgetting the audience. But it was too late. A sharp, popping sound echoed through the auditorium. A small puff of gray, acrid smoke drifted out of the server rack. On the massive screen, the beautiful neural network visualization shattered into static. A single, ominous line of code appeared in a repeating loop across the screen. Fatal _exception. Kernel _panic _thermal _runaway. Error _code. 0xDEADBEF. Author, Lila _Vance _backdoor _net _service. The silence in the auditorium was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. Hundreds of investors stare at the screen, their mouths agape. The tech journalists were already typing furiously on their laptops. Madison stood frozen, her face pale as paper, her hands trembling over the keyboard. Ethan looked like he had been struck by lightning. He stared at the repeating line of code on the screen, specifically, the words, Lila _Vance _backdoor. He slowly turned his head toward the audience, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my black suit jacket. Adrian stood up beside me, pulling a small remote control from his pocket. He pressed a button, and the auxiliary screen on the left side of the stage, which was connected to our own network, suddenly powered on. A crisp, high-definition video feed appeared. It showed our lab with our own server rack running the ether, one chip. Ladies and gentlemen, Adrian's voice rang out, clear and commanding in the silent hall. It seems Summers Tech's Prometheus has crashed and burned. But fear not. The real future of AI chip technology is right here. On our screen, the data training cycle began. It processed the exact same 500 gigabyte dataset that Summers Tech had failed to run. The progress bar filled up with blinding speed. 10%, 50%, 90%, 100%. Training complete. Time elapsed. 42 seconds. Chip temperature. 41 degrees Celsius. Status. Stable. The crowd gasped. This is the ether, one chip, I said, my voice echoing through the microphone Adrian had handed me. Developed by myself and Sterling Empire. Unlike the stolen, unstable architecture you just saw melt on stage, our technology is complete, secure, and ready for commercial production. Ethan let out a roar of rage, pointing a shaking finger at me. Lila, you sabotaged us. You broke into our systems. This is illegal. Security, arrest her. I didn't break into anything, Ethan, I said, my voice calm and clear. The code that ran on your servers today was the exact code you forced me to sign over last week. The backdoor was a built-in safety protocol I designed to prevent unauthorized, incompetent hands from running a system they don't understand. You stole our technology. Madison screamed, her voice cracking hysterically. I built that chip. I spent 2 years. You spent 2 years in Ethan's bed, Madison. I interrupted her, my voice cutting through her lies like a scalpel. You don't even know how to run a terminal rollback. If you had actually read the source code instead of just taking credit for it, you would have found the compile time flag in 5 minutes. Lila, I'll sue you for every penny you have. Ethan yelled, stepping down from the stage toward me, his face twisted in a mask of fury. You signed the waiver. You have no rights to this technology. Actually, Ethan, she does. Adrian's lead attorney, Vance, stepped out from the crowd, holding a thick stack of legal documents. The waiver misses. Vance signed was predicated on the release of liability and the financial disclosures you provided. However, we have just filed a formal complaint with the SEC and the state police for corporate fraud, forgery, and malicious prosecution. Vance turned to the audience, raising his voice so every investor could hear. We have evidence that Mr. Chase forged corporate expense records to frame Mrs. Vance for embezzlement, and that he misled underwriters by listing an unqualified individual as the sole inventor of the patent filings. Under federal law, the patent applications filed by Summers Tech are now legally contested, rendering your pending IPO null and void. The auditorium exploded into absolute chaos. Investors were screaming into their phones.
Sell.
Sell everything. Pull our underwriting commitments now. Vance handed a copy of the police report to the uniform officers who had just entered the back of the auditorium. They weren't there for me. They walked straight toward the stage, bypassing the crowd. Ethan Chase, the lead officer said, stepping onto the stage. You are under arrest for corporate fraud, forgery, and filing a false police report. Please step away from the terminal and put your hands behind your back.
No.
This is a mistake. It's her. She's the one who did this. Ethan screamed, struggling as the officers forced his arms behind his back and clipped the metal cuffs around his wrists. Madison, call our lawyers. Call them now. But Madison wasn't listening. She had collapsed onto the floor, clutching her stomach and sobbing hysterically as the flashbulbs of dozens of journalists captured her disgrace. The sapphire necklace around her neck caught the harsh stage lights, looking cheap and gaudy against her tear-stained face. I stood in the center aisle, watching them drag Ethan away. As he passed me, his eyes were bloodshot, filled with a mixture of terror and desperation. "Lila, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "We started in a basement, remember? You can't do this to me. We can share the company. I'll give you whatever you want." I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing.
No anger, no regret.
Just a profound sense of closure. "You're right, Ethan," I said softly. "We started in a basement, but I was the one who built the stairs. You just thought you could fly." I turned my back on him and walked out of the auditorium, my heels clicking firmly against a polished marble floor. 6 months later, the morning sun was warm as it streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new office. The plaque on the door read, "Lila Vance, Chief Technology Officer and Co-founder, Sterling Vance Technologies." Summer's tech was gone. After the disastrous launch event, the underwriters pulled out immediately, and the SEC launched a full investigation. The company's valuation cratered from $6 billion to zero overnight. Ethan's assets were frozen to pay off the massive lawsuits filed by his investors. He was currently serving a 3-year sentence in a state penitentiary for corporate fraud and perjury. Madison had left him the moment his bank accounts were frozen. It turned out she wasn't even pregnant. She had faked the medical records to force Ethan into marrying her before the IPO. Last I heard, she was working as an assistant at a local car dealership, her youngest CTO, title a permanent stain on her resume that ensured no tech firm would ever hire her. "Here's the final quarterly projection," Adrian said, walking into my office and placing a cup of hot coffee on my desk. "The Ether. One chip has officially secured 60% of the enterprise cloud market share. We're opening our second manufacturing plant in Austin next month." I smiled, taking a sip of the coffee. "And the legal transition?" "Fully completed. Your father's name has been officially added to the foundational patents," Adrian said, his expression unusually soft. "He would have been very proud of you, Lila." I looked down at the leather-bound notebook resting on my desk, its worn pages safe and intact. "Thank you, Adrian," I said quietly. "For everything." "You don't need to thank me," Adrian said, walking to the window and looking out at the city below. "I just invested in the right person." I stood up and joined him at the window. The sky was a brilliant, clear blue, stretching out endlessly over the horizon. I had survived the isolation, the betrayal, and the cold rain. And today, I was finally standing on ground that was entirely my own.